We ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Stuart Eisenberg from the law firm of Eisenberg Rothweiler, and we're here this morning to talk to you about some terrible things that happened at Glen Mills School over the course of 40 years, actually. Since 1976, we represent over 300 men who have been abused physically and sexually at this school. We have two victims here, and they will answer your questions. But I wanted to first introduce my partner, Nancy Winkler, and my co-counsel, Jeff and Matt Solomon, who all of us represent these men who have come forward over the last number of months to tell us and explain to us the terrible things that happened to them at Glen Mills School. There have been reports in the media before this, but now you will have an opportunity to hear and understand the extent of the problem and the magnitude of this situation that has had tremendous effect on these two gentlemen, as well as the other hundreds of men who've come forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy Winkler, who will get into more details about the cases that we filed this morning.
Good morning. Today, we filed 5 lawsuits against the Glen Mills schools for boys who were abused who are now men. 2 of those cases were filed confidentially. The initials are MA. The other case is WL. There was a case filed on behalf of Mr. James Rushton, Mr. Raymond Ward, and Mr. LeBoy Wiggins, who is seated next to me. Previously, we filed 8 lawsuits. Tafiq Abdullah, who is seated next to Mr. LeBoy Wiggins, was filed previously. A lawsuit was filed on behalf of SG, Basil Jarman, DJ, AM, MM, IP, and William Quivers. We represent, as my partners told you, over 300 men who were abused at the Glen Mills School. 13 lawsuits have been filed thus far. We intend to file lawsuits on behalf of all of the 300 men. Their stories are horrific. The Glen Mills School was touted as a prestigious reform school. It was a residential school, a red brick building with sprawling green fields, well known across the country for its athletics. It was supposed to help these boys get on the right path, many of whom came from single-parent families and disadvantaged backgrounds. Most were sent by a court system from Philadelphia for some things as minor as truancy. Glen Mills was considered to be one of the best schools of its kind, drawing boys sent there from across the country. In fact, one of the men we represent today is from as far away as Texas. The facade outside was a stark contrast to life inside the walls. Glen Mills was a house of horrors. Inside the walls, there was a culture of abuse, a culture of concealment, a culture of ignoring the many pleas for help from students within the walls who were assaulted and abused. Keeping the assaults and abuse undercover, a secret from the outside world, was the mantra there. They received funding from Philadelphia for each of the men that were sent there to the tune of $52,000 a year. As many of the men who we represent have told us, Glen Mills' physical and verbal abuse were the norm there. Many of these young boys were also sexually abused, some raped, some repeatedly. It was known inside the walls that this is how it was. Don't tell, because nobody's going to listen. As the many men have told us, it was the norm to be thrown onto the floor and choked, sometimes to the point of unconsciousness. It was the norm to be thrown into a refrigerator or a washer. It was the norm to be thrown across the room and into a wall. It was the norm to be beaten so badly that family visits were canceled and an excuse of sickness was made so the bruising wouldn't be shown to your family. Or if the abuse was so bad that you had to go to a hospital and they finally took you to a hospital, you were told that you must say that it was a sports injury, because if you didn't say that, you would be sent somewhere worse. Could you imagine? This shouldn't happen to children. These were all children that were sent there. These boys' lives have been shattered. The men have been broken. When they talk about what life was like for them at Glen Mills and how it affected them, there is a singular and consistent theme to what they say. They say they became angrier. They became distrustful of authority and broken. They use those words. It wasn't until a journalist from the Inquirer, Lisa Gartner, wrote an in-depth article talking about the rampant abuse at Glen Mills that the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services finally ordered the removal of the boys from the school last year. That was in March. And in April, the 14 separate licenses that they held were finally revoked. Today, Glen Mills remains shuttered. But for how long? Their acting director, Christopher Spriggs, has stated that they have plans to reopen. These brave men that we represent, and they are here today on behalf of all the 300, are coming forward to get justice for their shattered lives, and so that the public can finally know about the horrors that went on at Glen Mills. We've heard some of what's happened, but the public doesn't know how long this has happened. We hope that the doors remain closed so that no other boys endure the pain and abuse that these men have. Just last week, Governor Wolf, in response to the abuses at Glen Mills, proposed an additional $5.1 million to boost and help overhaul the state's oversight of residential juvenile facilities and programs. This budget, I understand, would fund more than 100 additional staff persons within DHS, and we applaud the governor's efforts. This is a good start, but much needs to be done to overhaul DHS, the state agency that licenses and monitors privately run residential facilities for court-ordered youth, as well as youth that were sent into foster homes in the foster care system. It has been painful for all of these men to remember the details, the horrors that haunt them. It has been even more painful for them to speak about the abuse. Two of the brave men we represent are here today to talk with you. One, and I will turn it over to them in just a moment, one of these men, LaBoy Wiggins, lived at Glen Mills in the 1987 calendar year. He is now 48 years old. The other gentleman that will speak to you today is Tafiq Abdullah. Tafiq is 19 years old. He lived at Glen Mills from 2016 through 2017. So just imagine, 1987 to 2017. That gives you an idea of the expansive time that the abuses took place at Glen Mills. Of the 300 men we represent, the oldest is 58 years old, and the youngest are 17. We have uncovered abuse at the Glen Mills School from as early as 1976 through 2018, over 42 years. There is no doubt that this has been a house of horrors. Let me now introduce to you Tafiq Abdullah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tafiq Abdullah. I lived at Glen Mills Schools from 2016 to 2017, and I was 16 and and 17 years old. The physical, verbal, and emotional abuse I suffered at the hands of Glen Mills staff members will continue to haunt me for the rest of my life. There was plenty of physical pain as well. One act caused my left shoulder, to get dislocated. Another act left me with a chipped tooth that became infected because the school didn't allow me to see a doctor, which caused me to have an abscess. I was often thrown to the ground and slapped and stomped on by staff members who would take turns to beat me. I was frequently choked by staffers until I was unconscious or close to it. There was emotional pain as well. One staff would frequently spit in my face and call me a nigger. I watched a staffer break a jaw of another student and then threaten me if I reported to tell anybody about the attack. The physical and emotional pain I suffered at Glen Mills had scared me. It had traumatized me, and it had changed me for the worse. Before my time at Glen Mills, I loved talking to people and going out. Now, I'm more of an antisocial, and I had trouble trusting people. Glen Mills had a strong athletic system. I was an accomplished football player. I was being looked at by several colleges. Because of the events at Glen Mills, I lost my opportunities to get recruited. Glen Mills was supposed to help me and get me on the right path. Instead, it seems I went on a detour. Now I have emotional breakdowns. I feel like I'm just a failure in life. Glen Mills schools took from me the positive light I had as a teenager, and now all that's left is darkness. I am coming forward as a survivor and have filed this lawsuit because no kid should have to go through the abuse that I went through at Glen Mills schools. At first I was hesitant to come forward, but now I realize that the only way for the public and the politicians to know just how bad things were at Glen Mills schools is to hear about them firsthand from people like myself who survived an unthinkable amount of physical, verbal, and emotional abuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Tafiq, for sharing with us. I'd like to next introduce LaBoy Wiggins to share with you some of what's happened with him.
Good morning. My name is LaBoy Wiggins. I was at Glen Mills School in 1987 for roughly like 6 months or so. I was sexually abused multiple times, physically abused multiple times, verbal abused. Every day at Glen Mills was a horror to me. Every day. Every day I witnessed abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse. The abuse happened so much to me that I ran from Glen Mills. I was caught on the railroad tracks by numerous staff, and they beat me very bad. I received stitches at Glen Mills in my head, in my forearm, in my leg. And I was taken to the medical department at Glen Mills. And even a nurse abused me when I was there. I was never taken to a hospital. Never. Every day in Glen Mills, to me, was the worst part of my life. And I'm still suffering from this day. And I'm 48 years old today. Glen Mills had the chance to form me and make me a responsible adult. But Glen Mills was a school of horror to me. It transformed me into a person that I couldn't trust no one. I couldn't stand the sight of myself. I couldn't stand the sight of grown people because every act that was committed against me was committed by a grown person. The individual that was sexually assaulting me used to call me a black mother after he assaulted me. But this is the same person who used to look over me and try to, and he had the badge like he was reforming me, but he made me worse. I was given a script to read to y'all, but I'm not gonna read that script because what I'm telling y'all is from the heart, even though this script is from my words, but I can't read this. If Glen Mills School open back up, it's going to continue the pain. It's going to continue to do what it did. Y'all cannot let the school open back up by any means necessary. And I don't have any questions y'all have for me, y'all can ask. I don't have any more to say.
Thank you, LeBoy. Thank you very much for sharing everything. This was very difficult for these two men to come forward and share their darkest fears and what haunts them every day. Thank you for attending this press conference to raise awareness about the pervasiveness of the abuse that occurred at the Glen Mills School. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have about any of the lawsuits that we filed or any of the lawsuits that we will be filing on behalf of these men.
So the lawsuit, your main objectives are to keep the school closed, and is it also to make sure to compensate these young victims as well? What would you say the goal is here?
The lawsuits are, and what we can ask for in lawsuits on behalf of these men is compensation. We can't give their lives back to them, but we can ask for justice to be done so that they are compensated adequately for their shattered lives. We hope that by bringing these men before you and holding a press conference today, we are raising awareness about the pervasiveness of the abuse that occurs at facilities like this. Obviously, some are good, but Glen Mills, the abuses have occurred at least over 42 years, probably more. This is a horrible place that operated on the outside as something that was, to reform these young men. So we hope that by raising awareness, we are also shedding light on what needs to be done with the Department of Health and Human Services, and so that there can be an overhaul and more staffing and adequate monitoring. There's also it's also problematic in terms of how licensing gets done in Pennsylvania for facilities like this, and the fact that they held 14 different licenses for the different cottages made it very difficult to, I think, to actually oversee the entire facility and understand the abuses that were going on.